Claude Code is possibly the best AI coding tool out there right now, and it does expect you to use the Claude models, which are more expensive than the competition and have less generous subscription limits. But what if I told you there's a really easy way to use other models inside Claude Code? Introducing CLI Proxy, a tool that does exactly that, meaning you can use any GPT, Gemini or Grok models even with your subscription inside Claude Code, and it also automatically switches between similar accounts to make the most out of your usage limits. Let's go through how to use it. And by the way, if you like these kind of videos, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It really does help. This is Claude Code running GPT 5.6 Terra with low effort. Don't worry about the API usage billing, I'll tell you why that's not the case later. But I can give it a prompt like, what model is this and who was it built by? And we can see it says GPT 5.6 Terra built by OpenAI. I can change the model between Terra, Luna and Sol, and I can change the effort level, even making use of Ultra Code, which I won't do in this video. But I can use Claude Code as I normally would, the only difference being that it's using an OpenAI model. So I can ask it to give me all the information it knows about Opus 5 and present it to me in HTML. And we can see it makes use of my skills, so my brainstorming skill. It has full Claude Code task support. It uses the new Firecrawl search API to find me detailed information about Opus 5, and once it's done, I get this impressive looking page with only 11% of my usage used, even though Claude Code has said I've used a lot of context, which is a slight bug that comes with the system. So to set this up, you'll first need to install CLI Proxy with Brew if you're on a Mac. Don't worry, I'll have a link to this URL in the description. And if you're on a Windows or a Linux machine, then there are different steps here. And there's also a step for you to install it with Docker if you want to have this on a separate VPS. The next step is to edit the configuration file, which is in a different location based on how you've installed it. This is where it is if you installed it with Brew on a Mac. And in here, there are a few things you have to change. So the first thing is the secret key, which is the password you'll use to log into the CLI Proxy web view, which can be anything, and will be hashed inside the configuration after you've logged in. Then you'll have to add at least one API key, which I'll explain why later, but this is the token that gets bundled with the request that goes to the model provider's server. So for now, I'm going to get rid of these two, and you could use OpenSSL to come up with a random hex number, but for the sake of this demo, I'm just going to make something up. Then when you're done with the config, run this command to restart the CLI Proxy service. And after that, navigate to localhost 8317, which should bring you to this screen where you can log in with the password you set for your secret key. Then from this dashboard, go to OAuth logging, and here we can see all the options we can log in with, from Codex to Anthropic to Antigrav and even Kimi. But for now, I'm just going to log into Codex by opening this link, clicking on this user, and following the process. And from here, this page will look the same. But to see if you've properly logged in, you need to go to Auth Files, and now you can see my Codex login. The next and final step is to configure your client, so in our case Claude Code, to make use of CLI Proxy. Note there are other clients you can use, like Codex, Droid, or OpenCode. And to do that, I've created an alias in my shell config with the base URL pointing to the CLI Proxy server, the Anthropic auth token, which is the token we set earlier, and the GPT models I want to use in place of the Claude models. Note, if you have multiple clients you want to use with CLI Proxy, like a Codex one and an OpenCode one, it makes sense to give them each a different token. So after I refresh my shell configuration, I can run my alias, which opens Claude Code with GPT 5.6 Terra. One thing to note is that if you wanted to, you could sign in with your Claude subscription and connect that to Codex, but technically that goes against the Claude terms of services, so I won't recommend doing that. Anyway, as cool as this is, how is CLI Proxy actually able to do this? Well, at a high level, CLI Proxy is essentially a proxy server that allows a client like Claude Code to read the API format of a different model. So normally if I send a prompt in Claude Code, this goes to Anthropic servers and the response comes back in Anthropic's API format that Claude Code can read. And if I do the same thing with Codex CLI, so send a prompt from there, that goes to OpenAI's servers and comes back in OpenAI's API format, which Claude Code can't read. So CLI Proxy sits between the client and the model provider's servers, turns a request from the client into a format that the model provider can understand, and turns the response from the model provider into a format that the client can understand. So this is how, in my demo, I was able to use GPT 5.6 inside Claude Code with support for reasoning efforts, sub-agents, and workflows. But the more interesting side of this is how CLI Proxy handles authentication. Because normally, if I log into a model provider's website to use my subscription, I get back a token that can only be used by that model. But when I log in using CLI Proxy, it gets that token and saves it in its own auth directory. Meaning a request from Claude Code will contain the dummy token that was defined in CLI Proxy's config, because Claude Code does expect a token to exist. And when this request goes to CLI Proxy, it checks its list to see if this token exists, then sends a normal request with the real provider token. Which is why you can have multiple accounts from the same model provider, and CLI Proxy will just choose the token that it wants to use to make the most out of your rate limits. But as cool as this is, it's not an entirely new technique. Kimi and GLM already let you use their models inside of Claude Code, and their CC Mirror that lets you create isolated versions of Claude Code using custom providers. But with these existing methods, you're locked into one provider. So I can't make my Fable model GPT, my Opus model GLM, and my Sonnet model Kimi. I have to use that provider's models for everything. And if I wanted to use Codex for this instead of Claude Code, well, that won't work because some of them don't seem to support that API. Which is why Theo and even Thibaut from OpenAI recommend using CLI Proxy if you want to use GPT models inside of Claude Code. And speaking of Claude Code, if you want to see a trick I use to massively reduce tokens from Claude Code web searches, then check out the next video.